All right, hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. I am Michael, your host. So, Dave, what we're going to be doing today is just going through some news. Since this is still early in the year, we're barely getting things started in 2025. I figured let's go through the most recent, latest, greatest, I guess you can call it, Star Trek news, because surprisingly, there's quite a bit of things going on. Not from the movie side. Don't be ridiculous. It doesn't seem like we're ever going to get a new Star Trek movie. I believe the Star Trek film that was greenlit has been pushed again. So at this point, David, I'm just going to cross my fingers and pray and hope that someday we'll get another Star Trek movie. But before we get into all of that, if you are a new listener, be sure to find all of our shows, past, present, and in the future, pretty much anywhere you find podcasts. Just search Star Trek from the Holodeck. If you're an Apple Podcast or Spotify listener, be sure to give us a thumbs up and give us a review, as it does help trigger those algorithms. It helps us get seen by more eyes, and we can definitely use that assistance. David, Ronald D. Moore has voiced his thoughts on possibly coming back to Star Trek in the near future. I threw in near future. That's wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking, but...
It's not near future, but he mulls over a future return during a recent interview with, I believe he was a guest on Katie Sackhoff's podcast. I will never get used to celebrities of her status having podcasts. It seems strange. Like, shouldn't you be out working, acting? Like, you're doing what I'm doing. Like, why?
Exactly.
I don't want to do what I'm doing.
Why are you taking our jobs away?
Yeah, do what you do. Because I wish I could do what you're doing.
Keith Sackhoff, look at what you got going.
Yeah.
Why are you taking us over?
Yeah, you're in two awesome franchises. You're in Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars, two of the biggest sci-fi franchises of all time. Please, stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane.
All right, so just as many herald Gene Roddenberry as the father to Star Trek, according to this article from Bleeding Cool, shaping its original foundations with the original series since 1966, Ronald D. Moore is as deserving of similar praise for helping to shape much of modern Trek, which I would agree with, starting with The Next Generation. His writing credits cover 93 episodes across The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. And that doesn't even include his two Next Generation films, the crossover Generations, which premiered in 1994, which was the crossover with the original series.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the critically acclaimed and beloved First Contact, which premiered in 1966. Now, since leaving the franchise in 1999, most of us may know that Moore moved on to bigger... No, maybe not bigger. More successful things for him, at least.
Well, he was able to branch out his portfolio.
Yeah, because
that's a better way to say it.
He did a very fan-popular series, a fan-beloved series called Roswell.
Yes.
Which is pretty damn good.
Oh, my God, dude. Roswell's awesome.
It's a really good series. It's a little hokey at times. I think it's a product of its time, but it's really well developed. Then you have Carnival. That was a great series. And then Battlestar Galactica. David, which is probably, if not my number one favorite TV series, it's in the top 5.
Yes, I know. I've known you for a very long time, and Battlestar Galactica is kind of like, that is the one series that you hold almost like a holy Bible, because the work that, when you actually look at Battlestar, the work that it took to change Battlestar Galactica from what it was in the 1970s,
right,
into what it became in what was that, 2000?
2003?
2003?
2004, yeah.
And changing it into what we got in that time period, that was something that I think almost everyone was saying, that's Ronald D. Moore's masterpiece.
It is his masterpiece. I mean, yes, he's followed it up with Outlander, which is
good.
which is also good.
Yeah.
And For All Mankind is fantastic.
Oh my God, dude. For All Mankind, I think is not being spoken enough.
It's because it's on a small streamer.
Yeah, it's
Apple
on
TV
Apple
is
TV.
is great with their shows and their films. They do some pretty good work. They produce some pretty good shit. But it's still relatively small comparatively speaking. Comparatively, I should say, to other streamers like Netflix and Hulu and even Disney Plus at this point, I believe. And that's part of the reason why For All Mankind isn't being viewed or talked about as much as, say, his other shows. But regardless, David, we all know who Ronald D. Moore is. And if you didn't, now you do. During this podcast, David, and this is the vital news here. During the podcast, he reflected on his Star Trek past and whether he'd return to the franchise. So when the Battlestar Galactica star and host Katie Sackhoff asked Moore about writing more Star Trek, he said, "Oh yeah, there was a point where I had to get away. I was there for 10 years. That's funny. 10 years is a long time, David, but it seemed like he was there far longer than 10 years.
Because of like all the content that he had to write. I mean, think about it.
So in 10 years, he wrote 93 episodes and 2 films.
93 episodes plus.
That's quite an achievement.
Plus had to deal with 3 different series.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 93 episodes, but it was 3 different series.
He was largely responsible for carving out that era of Star Trek.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
especially when you look at the more leadership role he took on Deep Space Nine.
Oh, yeah. That writing room, dude. I mean, I remember when me and you covered the documentary of What We Left Behind of Deep Space Nine. I walked out of that documentary going, oh, my God, that writing room was legendary.
Powerhouse, dude.
That was a powerhouse writing room that basically, if you saw that bullpen, I'm like going, yeah, you have a lot of like really critically acclaimed writers in there that after their stints in Star Trek, they all branched out into amazing series.
Ronald D. Moore probably is
he's the headliner.
Yeah, he's the brightest star in that bunch.
Oh,
At least moving on, he was, just because of all the work he moved into afterwards. But in the interview, he says there was a point, however, where he could no longer watch Star Trek. He was essentially burned out. He said he lived in that world so much, it was like 26 episodes a year, which is a lot of television. I do miss those days.
That is a lot. If compared to like today.
Yeah, or you get maybe 8, maybe.
Yes, maybe 8 like
dude, I miss
the
days of. I know the writers, when you ask old school writers from television, a lot of them will say, kind of like the new way of 8 episodes. Well, of course, it's less work.
It's less work. It's far less
If
work.
I was a producer, I'm like, so basically you don't want to do the job I'm paying you to do? I would turn into Larry Bishop from Kill Bill. Like, here you are in the calendar. Oh, not anymore.
Not anymore.
He said, I had to get some distance from it, and then time passed. And then he goes on to say, I could start enjoying it sort of as a fan again. And you start thinking, wouldn't it be nice to go back and do it again?
And I honestly think that if he were to go back now, I think he would, number one, come up with some stellar stuff.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And I think...
Dude, would there be any fear if they announced tomorrow that Ronald D. Moore is going to produce the next Star Trek series, produce and write the next Star Trek series?
Movie?
Would you be afraid? Like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is going to work. Would you have doubts and hesitations?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't have any hesitations because Ronald D. Moore is arguably one of the more legendary television writers out there.
Yeah.
That, if he writes something, you know it's going to be good. And especially what I notice with a lot of like writers of Ronald D. Moore's age range, where basically how long they've been in the industry, that time where Ronald D. Moore is talking about when he has burnout was solely because, just like what me and you just talked about just a moment ago, they had to work like write 26 episodes a year sometimes, even more so. I've read documentaries where some writers had to write like 50, and that was insanity. Thinking about like, oh my God, 50 episodes a year.
It's crazy.
When you think about today's world where like writers have more leniency and, which is a good thing. You don't want like what is in the video game industry where they have what's called crunch, and where they just basically hammer you with work until you fall apart.
Well, that was the problem that plagued a lot of writers in the early days of television. It was the turnaround time.
Yeah.
It was how fast they need to get these scripts out.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires a lot of work. But David, I know there might be television writers that will listen to this and get really mad, but I don't care. That's like me going to work and saying, I don't want to do that, though.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I don't want to do that. That's a lot. But that's the job you got hired to do.
Yeah.
That's the business.
Yeah.
So I don't really feel sorry for them, especially when you realize that those residual checks never stop coming.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for Star Trek. I mean, dude, why do you think Star Trek actors don't really work afterwards?
Because they don't have to.
Now, Discovery and the new era, Strange New Worlds, it's a different story. Syndication,
It's
residual
far
income,
different.
it's very different setup now.
Yeah.
Okay, so bringing it back here, dude, yes, I agree that Ronald D. Moore would be such a beautiful choice to have him either helm a movie, but I think his yes, he's made some great films, but honestly, his skill set is within the television arena. That's where he excels.
Yeah.
So I'd rather him helm a TV series, and not just as an executive producer. I want him to be the actual showrunner. And if he were to do that, David, we would probably have one of the best Star Trek series of this era, if not ever, because he's actually never been a showrunner of Star Trek. He's always been an executive producer. He's been one of the head writers, one of the lead writers, but he's never been the showrunner.
And I think that's why, with me and you have discussed in past news episodes about how Terry Matalas moved on from Star Trek.
Yeah, not because he wanted to, but because Kurtzman couldn't get the let out.
Yeah, couldn't get the let out and basically get him locked in.
What a fool.
And yeah, it's still one of the biggest mistakes, but a big rebound would honestly be okay, I have Star Trek Legacy coming out. Bring in Ronald D. Moore to actually write it.
Yeah.
Be the showrunner for it.
I'm a little sold on Matalas doing it, but I wouldn't get mad.
I wouldn't get mad if Ronald D. Moore is doing it.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about Star Trek Legacy, and the key word there, legacy, who knows more about that legacy than Ronald D. Moore, who has written probably some of the most iconic moments for Star Trek from TNG, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. There's no one else that would be properly, I guess you could say, skilled, because he'd have the knowledge of everything that he could fall back on from what he's written, and then come up with something like I honestly think if Ronald D. Moore came back to Star Trek, it would be like Battlestar, where he took a hokey 1970 show and made it into one of the greatest sci-fi shows of all time.
Yeah.
I honestly think that if he were to do that, if you bring in Ronald D. Moore to do Star Trek Legacy, that could be his magnum opus again, where it's like, okay, I'm going to take everything I've learned from my generations of work that I've done for Star Trek, bring it all together for Star Trek Legacy, because he's probably written and knows what to write about.
Yeah, it would definitely be a good series. And I hope that Kurtzman is listening to this and he heard the interview that Ronald Moore had on Sackhoff's podcast, because he's literally saying he's open to coming back. And if you have someone like this saying that, you are absolutely stupid if you don't jump on that.
Yeah, it is very true.
Now, we do have certain problems with Star Trek, unfortunately. One Star Trek actor thinks the legendary sci-fi franchise is dying, and the reason why he thinks it's dying is because Kurtzman told him. So you have the guy running things. Now, we're pretty chill with Kurtzman. We don't take him to task like a lot of people do, because not that we're shills for Kurtzman, as we've been called, but because I don't think Kurtzman is the devil on the shoulder of Star Trek currently.
He's not Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah, yes. For the most part, yes, there are problems in his era, but you can argue there are problems in other eras of Star Trek. Kurtzman didn't really have a handle on what he wanted to do at the beginning, but as I've said numerous times now, I do believe that for the most part, we're in a pretty good place in terms of content for Star Trek, how they're producing these shows now. Strange New Worlds, it's strong. Picard's final couple seasons were strong. Discovery's last couple seasons were very strong. So for the most part, we're in a good place. But I've always said, David, what have I always said? I've always said that if you don't restock the pond soon for Star Trek will find it very hard to ever become a pop culture icon or phenom again. Because what brought people to Star Trek, David, in the first place were, of course, the TV show. Mm-hmm. But TV shows, for the most part, appeal to a type of person. Movies are seen by large quantities of individuals. The Star Trek films themselves appealed to mass global audiences, whereas the TV shows didn't always manage to bridge that gap because television is different. Movies are designed to go overseas to get that international box office. And also, films are seen by millions and millions of millions and millions of people in a weekend, in a very short amount of time. And because of that, you have, even if you hold on to 10, 15% of that, let's say there's a 10 or 15% retention, meaning people watch that movie, that Star Trek film, and they say, I like this. I'm going to see what else Star Trek has to offer. Then they become fans of the series. And at times they don't, because the movies are designed to appeal to different types of people. The TV shows are geared towards more of an intellectual audience, the go-to Star Trek audience. Whereas the movies are not necessarily designed through an intellectual lens because it's adhering and trying to gravitate to a different type of audience.
Yes.
So you need those big films. And in 2009, with J.J. Abrams' reboot, we had speculated that this was going to be it. Because of its success, it's going to breathe new life into Star Trek. And it did for a very short time. And now we're right back to square one. Even though Kurtzman and Paramount Plus is putting out Star Trek shows, for the most part, the only people watching these shows are a select group of Star Trek fans.
Yes.
Not even mass Star Trek fans, a select group of Star Trek fans, and that comes, unfortunately, with the nature of streaming.
Yeah.
Being on a small platform like Paramount Plus isn't ideal to build an audience because you're behind a paywall, and the people who are going to be willing to pay are people who are Star Trek fans.
Yeah.
Joe Schmo, who isn't a Star Trek fan, isn't going to say, you know what? Paramount Plus has Star Trek on there. I'm going to pay $9 a month so I can watch Star Trek. I've never watched it before, but I'm going to go ahead and take the plunge and spend $9 on a streaming service to watch a series I've never watched before, I have no connection to. That's typically unheard of. That usually isn't what happens. So that's the reason why Star Trek is kind of at a standstill in terms of growth.
Well, it also comes down to kind of like, that's why I'm beginning to see more the nature of streaming also comes down to quality. Because if your quality is just a smidge off, you can kill your product before it even hits. Because just like you said, those Joe Schmo viewers will tune in, see your crap that you put out there because it's streaming and you need the content.
You're talking about Section 31, right? Is that what I'm serious? That's what you're talking about.
Unfortunately, yes. But like, you put that out there for Joe Schmo to tune in, and they see it and they go, this isn't great. I'm not going to tune in for, TNG. I'm not going to tune in for, Discovery. Where you look at the flip side, if they were just to do, say, a movie like Picard's, I'm just going to throw it out there, Picard season 3.
Mm-hmm.
What happened with Picard season 3? You saw people suddenly, you saw that spike, and me and you covered it in past shows, that you saw a spike in streamers tuning into past TNG episodes.
Yeah.
Oh, I just watched Picard season 3. I'm going to binge watch the entire freaking TNG seasons.
And you know what Kurtzman and Paramount Plus should have done? They should have doubled down on Star Trek Legacy.
Yeah.
They should have capitalized on the success of Picard's 3rd season. But they didn't. That was their moment to try to grow the franchise. Now, bringing it back to this particular interview, the actor that plays Zeph, the most stupidest character in Star Trek,
Kazinsky.
Kazinsky, yes, he revealed that Kurtzman and director Alatunde explained to me that Star Trek is dying. This is what we've been saying. And I do like to be validated, David, but these are one of those moments when I wish I was wrong. Cuz obviously we're going on what we see. You know, the fact that there just aren't younger people watching Star Trek it's not, you don't need to do a lot of research to realize that Star Trek isn't growing. So it's kind of just something we threw out there, and we talked about it through various discussions that were more or are more elaborate than how we're going through it now. But we've talked about this, that we don't see growth in Star Trek. And part of that problem is, yes, I do agree with you that quality must be there, and that is a big issue. But also, in order for them to even see that quality, they have to find a way over that paywall. And as I said, most people aren't going to pay for something unless they're a fan of it. And the fans of Star Trek are pretty much the ones who are paying to see Star Trek. And now, I had said years ago, I believe, David, in 2018, 2017, that Star Trek should probably re-syndicate, or I should say Paramount Plus should probably re-syndicate or repurpose their streaming shows 2 or 3 years delayed on regular broadcast linear television. That would have worked 5 or 6 years ago, but now linear television is also dying.
Mm-hmm.
So the new place where I'm going to say they need to dump these is on YouTube.
Yeah.
If you want massive amounts of people, you want those millions of eyeballs on your show, and you want to spark growth, and I don't care that I paid for it and these people aren't, because I'm here for Star Trek. I want Star Trek to survive.
Yeah.
I know some people are like, well, we paid for it and now they get it for free. Well, look at it like this. We paid to watch it when it was coming out.
Yes.
Now, 3 or 4 years delayed, they should be dumping Discovery right now on YouTube for free.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Because, like, that's the way I think.
It's the only way they're going to get new people to see it, Dave. It's the only
new people
way
to see it, and also to generate even the inkling of more revenue if that's what they want.
Yeah. Do you remember we did this breakdown of revenue for Star Wars The Mandalorian when they released, I believe, the first, was it Star Wars Mandalorian where they released the first season? No. It was it was the pilot episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. They released it prior to the second season. They released the first episode for free. And we had broken down based on how the revenue structures are set up for YouTube and how many people viewed it in a weekend. And our calculations, and this is not, we know how to calculate shit. We came up with a dollar amount, if you remember, David.
Yeah.
That far exceeded any subscription payments could have brought.
Exactly.
And so in one episode on YouTube, they probably made more money on that release on YouTube with one episode than they made the entire first season.
And look at it this lens, add this equation to it also. When they did that, you saw a spike in interest, and in doing so, you made Strange New Worlds that more popular.
It almost became, because of that, it almost became the flagship show now.
Exactly. Yeah. Strange New Worlds during that time
Is the current flagship.
became the flagship.
And now it is because it's the only series left. But
And I'm like looking at him. I'm like going, why aren't you doing this with Discovery? Throw Discovery out on there. You're gonna see a spike.
you got to do it. You got to have growth because that you cannot produce content like this in a bubble and hope that it survives. It can't. It literally can't survive like this. Star Trek, I'm going to say it now. Just like I said this, Alex Kurtzman, you probably listened to our show and said, you know what? He's right. It is dying. And now he's going to listen to this. You have to pull Star Trek off Paramount Plus.
Yeah.
You have to find a place where it can be seen by new people.
It bothers me, Mike, because we've seen them do the strategy and it works. But it's almost like they do it half-assed. Here, let's do this too at the time, because I remember me and you covering this. Let's release Discovery on Netflix. Okay.
See, they were doing that internationally.
Yeah, and then they saw a spike in interest.
Yeah.
They saw a spike in revenue over Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Did they capitalize on it? Nope.
No.
Did they follow the same strategy with any of the other series? No. And then when I hear this, now I'm going to say this with a caveat.
Mm-hmm.
This is an actor. This is basically, like telephone. An actor is telling us what the show, the lead producer of Star Trek is saying, and the director is saying about a franchise. Instead of actually hearing it from Kurtzman and Alatunde, to me, stepping back, it just sounds like you could say that the actor is just bitter because his movie was shit and it was poorly received.
Yeah,
Same thing with Alatunde.
I would argue, you're right, because I was thinking the same thing, but I had a slightly different interpretation of it. I sensed that, hey, my movie bombed, and I don't fucking care, so I'm going to tell exactly what was said to me.
Yeah.
I don't think he made it up. I don't think Alex Kurtzman nor the director probably wanted him to share that publicly.
Probably not.
And I think because the movie was just universally trashed, he's like, fuck it, I have no future here. I mean, he died anyways, and he was the worst character.
He was the worst character. But
so let me read everything he says really quick, David. So just so we have all of that out there. I spoke to Alex and I spoke to the director, and they explained to me that Star Trek is dying. And I don't know if people know that, but I was talking about Star Trek at my gym where I fight, I'm a boxer and I fight with a lot of kids. I don't fight them, but train with them. And none of them knew what Star Trek was. Can you imagine that? I mean, just conceive of that for a second, that they had never, I would say Star Trek, and they were like, Star Wars? I was like, no, Star Trek. And they were like, I think I've heard of that. Now, this is a very similar story to the stories that I could share.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about this before, David. We've had conversations with younger people, and they're like, Star Trek? Like, isn't that old show? They don't even know new Star Trek is being produced.
Yeah.
And they've never seen Star Trek. They don't know what it's about. They know Spock. Maybe they've heard of Spock because he's just an iconic pop culture icon at this point.
Yeah.
And they possibly heard of Kirk and maybe Picard because Patrick Stewart is famous. And I'm saying maybe they heard of them. But most people attribute Patrick Stewart's work, or at least his fame, to the Marvel franchise now.
Yes.
More than Star Trek. When you think Patrick Stewart, we think Jean-Luc Picard, but a lot of the younger people think Professor Xavier.
And also it goes into that line that basically had me and you screaming at the heavens when we watched Star Trek Day, their celebration for Star Trek, and a lot of the young actors were like going, "Oh, have you watched TNG yet?" "No, I haven't, but I'm going to when I get home." And me and you were like screaming, "Why are you here?" If you don't know the series and you haven't watched it, why are you here?
Dude, yeah.
And that's the thing about, like, I think it's also partly what I notice with a lot of Star Trek, particularly the fan base. We are very passionate about Star Trek and we're very protective of it. but also we don't promote it enough to tell, like say, for example, let's say a parallel between Star Wars and Star Trek, right? Star Wars, I see so many videos where a parent will sit down with their child when they're like 5 years old and sit them down and we're going to watch Star Wars. We're going to watch episode 4, 5, and 6. And it becomes like a family tradition. You never see that with Star Trek.
Well, it's also different. And you are right. We don't see that, but it's very different. Star Wars is designed to be more fun and it's more of a spectacle experience. Star Trek is more meditative. It's not as intense in terms of action. In fact, that's something Kurtzman also shares with Kazinsky. According to Kazinsky, I do not believe Kurtzman has come out and confirmed whether or not these things were actually said by him. But he also said Kurtzman said that Star Trek is dated. He says that Kurtzman said that the franchise was dated. At the very least, he tells that he felt that young people eager for action and incident will not tune in into the first few seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation as it moves slowly and has poor production values. And when it comes to the original series from 1966, Kazinsky and Kurtzman felt that there was no way a modern kid would want to tune in. Hence, why he was okay with Section 31 being more traditional action schlock. Yeah, okay. It was an attempt by Kurtzman and company to reach a hip youth audience. Like, listen, dude, I'm going to get to that in a second. First off, you don't need to capture an audience and have them watch The Next Generation. To me, that's poor logic. Create a fresh Star Trek series.
Yeah.
And young people will find it if you promote it, market it correctly, and write it for a younger audience while also adhering to the core tenets of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that. And then the possibility remains, or there's a potential for them to go and say, I really like this series. Then they're going to be more patient because they love what they watched. And now they're going to be more patient and they're going to want to learn more about Star Trek. And I'm actually speaking from experiences I've had with some listeners. There are listeners who started listening to us because of Star Trek Discovery. And Star Trek Discovery was actually their first Star Trek series. Then they enjoyed our conversations and our callbacks and the way we explain things about Discovery and we refer to other iterations of Star Trek. They wanted to be a part of the conversation and they went back and started watching the older Star Trek. And they admitted that there are certain episodes they struggled with, but overall they said these are really good series. Like, well, yes, you just have to know what you're getting into. Know that you're watching a 1980s show if it's TNG, and if you're watching the original series, it's from the 60s.
It's from the 60s.
So I feel like, what's that saying from Kevin Costner's movie, that baseball movie? If you build it, they will come.
They will come, yeah.
Build it and they will come.
That's the problem, though.
Get rid of your fucking, brain obstacles. Kurtzman's overthinking it. I mean, you made Section 31 an action schlock. That was your attempt to add life to Star Trek?
You don't know your franchise.
No, you don't, because you could have made, this is what's even worse, is that you could have made this movie like this. You could have made an action schlock film and still adhered to Star Trek. And also the meditative quality that is always a part of Star Trek, the philosophical aspects. The 2009 Star Trek film, people loved, kids, young people loved that movie, and that movie skirted the line between what we feel comfortable with as Star Trek fans and what the general mass media, or I should say mass population, what's the word I'm looking for, David? Not mass audience.
Mass audience.
They split the difference. They gave us a little bit of what we would like as Star Trek fans, and then they also made sure that this movie, the 2009 Star Trek reboot, would also garner new audiences, and it did. So the formula, Kurtzman, which I believe Kurtzman worked on those films as a producer.
With Abrams.
So, what a fucking tool, dude. And this, I hate getting angry and calling them names, but that... These types of things get me annoyed because first off, I understand that making movies is a very delicate process, and it's very hard. It is hard to make movies. That's why not everyone can do it. But you could have done better than Section 31. If your goal was to bring in a hip audience, I can write you that version of a script. I can take your shitty Section 31 script and rewrite it, and it would have fucking it would have been awesome.
It would have been awesome.
Because the Section 31, that movie had potential, but the potential was snuffed out in the cradle.
Also, the idea that there are people out there saying that, oh, Star Trek is dying because it might be too much for younger audiences to handle. I look at like a movie like First Contact. First Contact, when it came out, guns a-blazing, it still was a movie that was built for Star Trek fans. But during that time, you saw a huge spike of new Star Trek fans, like kids coming out, because why? The movie was tailored for a mass audience.
Yeah.
But it still paid homage to the series. And I'm like going, there's so many times that I'm like going, Kurtzman keeps going in interviews saying that, oh, I understand Star Trek. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I hate now when people in any of the franchises say, I am a big fan of A, B, or C.
Yeah, David, you know who's not a fan of something and he writes the best version of it? Tony Gilroy.
Tony Gilroy.
The director and writer for Rogue One and Andor, Star Wars Rogue One and Star Wars Andor. He has said in interviews that he's never been a fan of Star Wars. And that's probably why he writes the best Star Wars. I sometimes think certain fans get so involved that they can't see things clearly.
They can't see through the weeds.
Yeah.
And like it's one of those things that basically I feel that if you are going into a franchise, you shouldn't be going in there just with a empty hand and basically saying, "Oh, I'll just write whatever," because that's what happens with Section 31.
David, did you know this, that it was never designed? It was never going to be designed. According to Kazinsky, that he noted that Section 31 wasn't ever, by its very design, going to be laid in with exposition, canonical details, or good character moments.
So
action was key.
So what was the point?
Why did you make this movie?
Why'd you make the movie?
Because, once again, stepping back, let me take off my Star Trek glasses for a second. If we would have reviewed this, let's say the movie was a bad Star Trek movie, but a good movie, we would have said that. Mm-hmm. Like, I know how to balance our reviews and critical analysis. I can understand some. For example, this 2009 movie, the 2009 reboot, wasn't a great Star Trek picture. It had good Star Trek moments, but it was a good, fun science fiction film. They could have done that. They didn't need to adhere to all of the nerdy Star Trek things that make us orgasm. That's not what I'm saying. You could have made something more fun, but good character moments. How is that? The movie was never designed to have good character moments. Well, I would argue you shouldn't be in the film business if you're actually thinking like that.
Yeah. Essentially, you're telling me that if Krasinski's right, and if this is what Kurtzman was thinking, you wanted to make a Michael Bay film.
Look at John Wick, okay? John Wick is sheerly, except for the first movie, sheerly action-oriented spectacle. Action is key. You could argue action is key when writing and producing the John Wick films. But you know what's not missing? Good character moments.
Yeah, because they still built characters.
Yeah.
The greatest moments in John Wick, I noticed that a lot of fans, including myself, I love the John Wick franchise. The scenes that we point out that are iconic for John Wick aren't the action sequences. Yeah, their action sequences are nice. It's those moments of what? Character development. Key point, the Baba Yaga scene when you first get introduced to the fact that John is actually more than what he seems.
Right.
and you have that dialogue between the Russian dad and his son, and he's telling him the story of Baba Yaga. Those are iconic moments. So you mean to tell me you have Section 31 where you could have had, okay, say, for example, they wanted to make a John Wick type of Star Trek. Okay. You could have actually done things like in a John Wick where you have character development for characters like Georgiou. Okay, show how badass and mysterious Georgiou is. Nah, we'll just make it about like we'll try to make her more sympathetic.
Dude, is Star Trek Section 31 now becoming Star Trek's version of The Last Jedi? Like where everyone just hates on it? It kind of is, right?
It is.
I think this is going to be this is going to be infamous. This movie is going to be infamous now,
and not in a good way either.
No, well, infamy isn't good.
There's the Star Wars holiday special, Mike, and that's infamous.
Okay,
but that's glorious.
Okay. Point taken. There are certain forms of infamy is pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. So, David, moving on to better news: Star Trek Starfleet Academy.
This is what I'm excited about.
This is cool. So, Jonathan Frakes allegedly dropped some spoilers, and he even called himself out because he wasn't sure if he was able to share certain things. Now, Robert Picardo is in it.
Thank God.
Tig Notaro is in it. How awesome is that? Okay. This is what Frank says. It has the most massive set of any Star Trek ever. Thank you for not solely relying on volume shooting. That's something that we don't always congratulate the Kurtzman era all the time, but I will say that they have been one of the few franchises that have utilized the virtual environments, the volume studios, effectively, and they are careful when to use it. And they know when they shouldn't use it.
Yes.
Whereas other franchises, nearly all of them, abuse it. And that's why a lot of the background imagery looks weird. The cinematography and lighting is flat. There's no depth. And we'll get into those details when we need to. I don't want to overdo the explanations of what volume shooting is. But I am happy to hear that they are using sets, full sets, in combination with volume shooting. So there's also a spaceship on the show.
Which you'd expect. I mean, it has to...
Well, there isn't just a ship. There is the ship. And it seems like, based on what Franks was saying, and then he does say that he hopes that wasn't a fucking secret. Those are his words. Because he's just talking. That's what happens at these conventions. But there is a specific ship that will be highlighted in the series. I'm assuming it's going to be a lot like Deep Space Nine in that regard, where Deep Space Nine is the focus, but you have the USS Defiant.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to. Deep Space Nine learned the hard way that they needed to have a ship. The first two seasons of Deep Space Nine I still love, but there were complaints. It felt isolating. It didn't really quite work in some ways.
It didn't really find its footing until you got the Defiant, because then you can actually do a lot of the Star Trek isms.
Yeah, you had options. And that's a smart thing that they're doing here with Starfleet Academy. Yes, the focus will be on the Academy, wherever that's going to be, whether it be Earth or still floating in the crossroads of space, as we saw in Discovery. But David, I am pretty happy about this. And he's saying that this series, he says the sets are great. The scripts are... He says they're funny, which is always helpful in Star Trek. Yeah, I would agree. Levity is good.
Yes.
And this is the key, David. It's aimed at much more hardcore Star Trek fans. Now, that is a good thing, but that can also be a negative.
Yes.
We don't want to slip into more
member berries
moments of self-referential behavior.
Mm-hmm.
That's the dangers when I hear of hardcore Star Trek fans will like it, I'm thinking fan service.
Yeah.
And I don't want fan service. I just want adherence to core Star Trek principles.
Yeah.
That, to me, qualifies our happiness for hardcore Star Trek fans, rather than, well, there's going to be mentions of Kirk. We might even have a flashback to Picard. I'm exaggerating here, but those are the types of things we see in the modern environment with these never-ending franchises that always want to go back to the past and not move forward. So I'm hoping that when he says that this will appeal to hardcore Star Trek fans, it's not due to its constant reflection on past series and past characters, but because it is adhering more to the core aspects and principles of Star Trek that we have become used to over the past however many years we've been watching Star Trek, right?
Yeah, because like, don't get us wrong, we're excited. Particularly, I'm excited about like seeing familiar faces like a Tig Notaro, especially like Janet Reno, or even take it further back. If he's talking about hardcore Star Trek fans, bringing in Robert Picardo to be the Doctor again.
See, that type of stuff's fine.
That's
as long as it's serving narrative purpose. And obviously, if Picardo is coming back as the Doctor as a permanent mainstay, then obviously he's going to have character reasons and story reasons for being there. So that type of stuff's not what I'm talking about. That type of stuff's just fine. I just don't want the over-reliance on some of those past aspects. For example, Picard season 3 was fantastic. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I gave the final episodes or so, like, I think 100%, I think.
Yeah.
But what were my issues with the third season? Was the moment that everybody else loved, which was them sitting on the bridge of Enterprise D, and it made no fucking sense.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but it didn't. I'm not go back and listen to the show. Why? LaForge building it by an entire ship by himself, just so we can have that moment. Now, I fell victim to the nostalgia. Obviously, I got the tears in my eye, and at the moment, I was like, "This is so cool." And even when I think about it now, yes, it's cool. But if I was writing this, I wouldn't have done that. I would have kept the crew together, but I felt like it was a little contrived. It felt a little forced to put Enterprise D there. Those types of things I'm not a fan of, because that is solely fan service. Now, because it came towards the end of the series, it didn't destroy the series, and it made a lot of sense in a nostalgic remembering the past, since that's kind of what that moment was about. The crew coming back together as a group to do one last mission. I understand the reasons why.
And I'll give them this, because I had the same issues as you did. I'll give them this, though. They at least made the attempt to try to explain it.
Correct.
There's so many times.
I'm not saying it's hacky.
Yeah. So many times this would be done really hacky.
Yeah.
But at least when we saw it, they tried to they actually made an attempt to make it fit into the narrative.
They didn't book a Boba Fett us.
They didn't book a Boba Fett us.
That's kind of like that is ridiculous fan service for no reason.
Where it's kind of like, all right, hi, how's it going? Okay, I'm here for like 5 minutes and I'm out.
Yeah, I'm gonna ride on the back of a Rancor. Why? Well, because we saw a Rancor once in Return of the Jedi. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. And like a bantha.
Yeah. So, David, it seems like the news I keep hearing coming out of Camp Kurtzman when it comes to Starfleet Academy, it's just adding to my excitement level. It really is. And because I don't know how to be happy, David, I get nervous. When I get happy, David, I get nervous. And when I get nervous, I'm no longer happy. So it's a vicious cycle. It's a very vicious cycle. I think I think Section 31 kind of made me afraid.
Oh no,
of a lot of things, because I
hit our first roadblock.
Well, David, I had been saying that the third or the fourth and fifth season of Discovery were really strong. It improved upon some of its issues. Picard season 2 and season 3 were strong. Strange New Worlds is strong. And then I'm like, okay, I feel great. Section 31 is going to be great. And it just brought me back down to 0. It brought me all the way back down to 0. And now I'm nervous again for Starfleet Academy. And I wasn't, because I felt that we were in a good place with Star Trek. Now I have my doubts. But it doesn't seem like they want to F this one up, because let's look at the logic of this. Kurtzman if we are to believe Krasinski, Kurtzman is very aware Star Trek is not growing.
Yeah.
It's idle and or actually dying. He has to succeed with this series. He has to succeed. And if they're smart, they will release the first 3 episodes, depending on the episode order. Let's say 2, at least. Maybe the first major story arc. You need to release them for free.
Yeah.
You need to release them for free, and you need to do a massive promotional and marketing campaign. You have to.
Oh, yeah.
And if they do that, then this series, if it's everything that we hope it is, then they may have some hope here, a future with this series.
Well, I honestly think the more that we learn about Starfleet Academy and kind of like getting like little hints and teases of like, this is what this show is going to be about. Here's the cast, and piecing it together like some conspiracy theorists out there and basically trying to figure out, okay, this is where we're going with the series. The biggest thing I pull out from Starfleet Academy is if they want to infuse new blood into the franchise, this is your moment to do it. Because Starfleet Academy, the idea of the Starfleet Academy in itself promotes the idea of bringing in young talent.
Yep.
And
well,
means
the main leads are the young kids,
young
right?
kids, yeah. And in doing so, if you make the young kids the center focus and have like, you know, mentor, quote unquote, mentor characters around them that we as hardcore Star Trek fans go, oh yeah, great that he's here.
Yeah.
And he's going to teach these kids. I honestly think, and I'm going to bring up at least a little success from the opposition in this war of geekdom in Star Wars. They could see some of the success that Star Wars sees with Skeleton Crew.
Right.
Where if you see a lot of the fan base on Skeleton Crew, they're young kids. And they get into it and they're loving these new characters.
Skeleton Crew was a smart move for Star Wars.
Yeah. Because they're bringing in what? New talent, new fan bases.
You're right, David. That's a good point with Starfleet Academy. The fact that even though they're moving away from deep space exploration for the first time, Starfleet Academy does center on a new group of young cadets.
Yeah. And I honestly think for me, the story progression for this should be, you don't see these kids actually go out into deep space, at least for a while. It should be kind of like a growing process where your season finale is them going out into space.
In a lot of ways, David, this seems like Prodigy Part 2, meaning
a lot of ways
strategy, not actual narrative. This isn't a sequel series. I mean, in terms of, this is Prodigy Take 2.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Prodigy was supposed to be the series that appealed to a young audience, which is what we talked about. The whole reason why it was going to be produced under the Nickelodeon banner and air on Nickelodeon first and then move over to Paramount Plus, I believe the next day is how it was originally announced and set up, was because they wanted, it was going to be a free series on Nickelodeon, which I thought was genius. And it was going to be, obviously, on Nickelodeon, designed to bring in that new youth, the new youth viewership. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, they canceled it. It didn't work out for them. And it seems like Starfleet Academy is now picking up that baton.
Yeah.
Because this is a series that is also, from what I have read, because they're using those young faces, those young cadets, they are learning about Starfleet. And in a lot of ways, that can be double service. Or I should say, it could be, you can double dip with that. What's the word I'm looking for, David? Not double dip. I'm thinking of a word. Let's play charades.
It is. It is because I know what you're trying to say. It's not double serving, but it is.
It's dual serving. They have a narrative that's designed around young kids. Force Awakens is a perfect example. Rey from Star Wars and Finn were the eyes of the new audience. They learned about these legacy characters, Luke, Han, Leia, and then the Empire, the Rebellion, through the eyes of these characters who were also learning about it. And they had a vague recollection of the Jedi and of Captain Solo. It was almost like a legend, a myth.
Yes.
And then they use these characters to flesh out and explore. And that's why Force Awakens worked for a lot of young, new fans who didn't watch the prior Star Wars films and were able to go and enjoy that movie. Starfleet Academy seems like it's going to be the exact same thing. Using those cadets, viewing from their eyes, and through them, you now can explain and introduce the world of Star Trek to potential new viewers.
Yeah.
That's smart. But in order for it to work, this series has to, and go right back to what you said, David, quality. It has to be, this series has to be all about quality.
Yeah.
In all aspects, because in today's environment where streaming is everywhere, there are thousands of options. The only way you're going to stand out is adhering to top-notch production value all across the board. What were you going to say, Dave?
Basically, the idea that it's amazing to me that basically you bring a Prodigy because, and again, this is an example of what I say when Star Trek sees something working, but they don't follow up on it. With Prodigy, everyone that has watched Prodigy has agreed it was a good series.
Right.
And everyone is, but
it's very good.
The beautiful part about Prodigy was it got fans, younger fans, interested in a old IP like Voyager.
It just didn't work on a mass level.
On a mass level, because they basically saw that basically like it was more difficult to actually continue the series on because it's like, well, unless we actually make this live action and basically bring in like the old cast of Voyager, that's what the fan base was asking for.
Yeah, well, because there were people that I was reading a whole thread just the other day about it. Like they want to watch Prodigy because it seems interesting, and everyone, all their fellow Star Trek friends, are telling them, "Yeah, dude, you should check it out." But there were so many people saying, "Yeah, I understand it's great, but I don't like cartoons."
Yeah, exactly, and that's the problem that I see with Paramount is like they're not using their successes. They're focusing on the negatives and basically just, okay, well, this didn't work.
And to be fair, David, like we like to throw this all on Kurtzman and I think rightfully so in some regard, so. But also we have to take into account the industrial context. Like what's going on with streaming. Paramount Plus is bleeding money. They're in the midst of a potential merger. Hopefully it goes through, but there seems to be at the time of recording this particular show, there seems to be an issue with the merger with Skydance. Someone else is trying to buy them now, and Skydance is threatening to pull out. When the deal was done last year, and that just sucks for us fans because I want us to move past this merger so we have a better, clear path. Because unfortunately, a lot of things are just kind of on pause when you're trying to go through a merger because they're not sure what's going to stay. They don't want to start producing things if it's just going to get canceled. So a lot of times there's just a lot of hurry up and waiting, unfortunately. So the studio itself has some blame that we can lay at their feet as well. I don't want to just put it on Kurtzman because unfortunately he's not making these shows all by himself. There is oversight. There is studio oversight and budget restraints and do's and don'ts. And we can't have this week or this month, or this isn't working for our streaming demographic. There's all types of conversations and studio notes that go to writing rooms. It's a part of the process. Yeah. So it's not always Kurtzman. It could also very well be the studio, which David, Metalis just shared this with the production of Picard Season 2. Apparently, the studio shit on so many ideas that he had for Season 2 because they said they don't think anyone will understand what you're doing.
Yes. And that just shows that basically the difference between executives and your creatives.
Unfortunately, the writers, the creators are the easy target because they're in front of us. But it's not always their fault. It really isn't.
Because at the end of the day, it comes down to, I think, what we have always summarized this situation. It comes down to numbers.
Yeah.
It comes down to the quote unquote bottom line of
It's money.
Money and executives.
This is a business, and that's what we always have to remember. At the end of the day, this is about making money. This isn't about our fun.
Yeah.
This isn't about our entertainment. This is about money.
Executives do not see profit in our enjoyment. They don't.
If they were smart, they would look at it that way, because what will bring in more consistent profit?
There you go. They don't see it as consistent. They want reactionary.
They want the immediate.
Yeah.
All right, David. Well, this does bring us to the end of our discussions. I want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to check us out on Patreon if you want to get more exclusive Star Trek discussions from us. Head over to patreon.com/RainmanDigital and pledge $5 or more to gain access to all of our additional Star Trek discussions. We are also putting on the dollar tier our extended Enterprise discussions. So anything that we don't get into on our regular Enterprise retrospectives, which we started just a few weeks ago, we're going to put some additional discussions on Patreon as well under the dollar tier. So head over to patreon.com/RainmanDigital and pledge.